Have you ever had a moment where your entire world went up in flames, only to find something beautiful and unbreakable rising from the ashes? My name is Audrey, I'm 32 years old, and for 5 long years, I poured my soul into trying to make it as an artist in the unforgiving jungle of New York City. So when my phone shattered the silence at 3 a.m., I never imagined it would be my dad on the other end, his voice tight with panic, telling me my apartment building was a raging inferno on the national news. But what truly shocked him more than the fire itself was my reaction. How could I possibly laugh at losing everything I owned? Before I tell you why I laughed at what should have been the most devastating news of my life, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. My mom was softer, but she always deferred to his judgment in the end. Their vision for my future was crystal clear. An accounting degree, a stable job, maybe teaching if I was feeling particularly wild. But I had been drawing since the moment I could hold a crayon. My high school art teacher, Mrs. Lamond, was the first person who ever looked at my work and told me I had real, undeniable talent. While my father rolled his eyes at the growing stack of art school brochures on my desk, she was the one who helped me meticulously assemble my portfolio. Art doesn't pay the bills, Audrey, my dad would say, his voice always calm but as unbending as steel. Do you have any idea how many talented people end up waiting tables for the rest of their lives? In that first year, I bounced between 3 different shared apartments, each one more cramped and chaotic than the last. To call it not much to look at would have been a generous compliment. But the rent for a 1-bedroom was shockingly affordable, and that bedroom had this incredible northern light that was an absolute dream for painting. He'd owned the place for 40 years and seemed to operate more on handshake agreements than formal leases. About 8 months ago, things in the building started breaking down more frequently. 2 small electrical fires broke out in the basement. They were quickly contained, but they left a lingering sense of unease. Meanwhile, my art career was finally, after years of struggle, gaining some real traction. My paintings, which explored themes of urban isolation through fragmented cityscapes, were finally connecting with people. The exhibition was scheduled to open in just 2 weeks from the night of the fire. The day before everything changed, I noticed a group of men in sharp suits walking through the building, clipboards in hand. I was too preoccupied and exhausted to question it further. The harsh, shrill ring of my phone cut through my dreams at exactly 3 a.m. I fumbled in the darkness, my hand knocking over a glass of water before finally finding the device. The screen was painfully bright, and it took me a moment to register my dad's name. Dad! My voice was thick with sleep. What's wrong? Is Mom okay? My building? What are you talking about? The apartment building on Bedford Avenue in Brooklyn. They're saying it started on the 3rd floor and spread incredibly fast. The reporter said the whole structure might be compromised. He paused, and I could hear his ragged breath. Please tell me you were somewhere else tonight. And that's when a strange, bubbling sound escaped from my chest. Audrey, why are you laughing? This isn't funny. Do you have insurance like I told you to get? Please tell me you listened to me this one time. When I finally caught my breath, I explained. I was so tired after setting everything up that the gallery owner, Sophia, insisted I just sleep on the couch in her office instead of going all the way back home. My laughter died in my throat as a horrifying thought suddenly hit me. I hung up before he could respond and immediately dialed Vanessa's number. Panic began to rise in my chest as I called an Uber, throwing on my shoes without even bothering to change out of the paint-splattered clothes I'd been wearing for the past day. 20 minutes later, the Uber dropped me a block away from my building. Police barricades blocked any closer access. Fire trucks lined the street, their flashing lights painting everything in a pulsing hellish red. I pushed my way through the crowd of onlookers, my eyes desperately scanning every face for someone I recognized. The first person I saw was Walter, wrapped in a Red Cross blanket, his white hair wild and his face smudged with soot. He was in the middle of arguing with a paramedic who wanted to check his oxygen levels. Walter! I cried out, rushing over to him. Are you okay? Where is everyone else? He turned, and a wave of pure relief washed over his face. The Patels got out early. They're over there, he said, pointing to where the family was huddled together near an ambulance. Vanessa was working her night shift, thank goodness. But they haven't found the couple from 6B or the student from the apartment next to yours. I spent the next hour in sheer agony, watching firefighters move in and out of the skeletal remains of the building. The couple from 6B had been staying with family, and the student had been at his girlfriend's place. No one was seriously injured, though several people, including Walter, were treated for smoke inhalation. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in soft shades of gray and pink, the fire marshal pulled a few of us aside. Could someone have deliberately set this fire? The Red Cross provided cots, blankets, and basic toiletries. Neighbors who had previously only exchanged polite nods now shared their stories, their fears, their grief. Some cried openly, while others just sat in shocked silence. I found myself in a strange, conflicted emotional state. I felt a genuine deep grief for our collective loss and a gnawing worry about what everyone would do next. This relief brought with it a crushing wave of guilt. How could I feel anything positive when my neighbors had just lost everything? "Oh, thank goodness," he sighed, the relief in his voice palpable. "But Audrey, everything you owned was in that apartment. Please tell me you at least had renter's insurance." The question I had dodged for years now demanded an answer.
No, Dad.
I never got around to it. His silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. I braced myself for the lecture, for the inevitable, "I told you so." But instead he just sighed again, a sound heavy with weariness and concern. "We'll figure it out. Your mother and I will help however we can." As I ended the call, I gazed back at the school where my neighbors were slowly beginning to stir. In the harsh light of day, the damage looked even more devastating. The building stood like a wounded animal, its windows blown out, its brick facade blackened and scarred. Water still dripped mournfully from the structure, and the air was thick with the smell of wet ash and melted plastic. Fire officials began allowing small, escorted groups to enter for a few minutes to retrieve only the most essential items. Walking into the building felt surreal. We took the stairs, as the elevator was obviously out of service. By the time we reached my apartment on the 4th floor, I was bracing myself for total devastation. My clothes were soaked and reeked of smoke. My books had swollen with water, their pages warped, and had fallen from their shelves in soggy heaps. I grabbed my passport from the small fireproof box under my bed, a backup hard drive with years of photos, and a small wooden box containing the few pieces of jewelry I had inherited from my grandmother. Outside, insurance adjusters had arrived and were already taking statements from tenants. One of them approached me, clipboard at the ready. His expression shifted instantly from professional efficiency to pity. "I see. Well, you should know that without insurance, you won't be eligible for immediate housing assistance or reimbursement for your lost property. You can check with FEMA and other local disaster relief organizations." As he moved on to the next tenant, Vanessa appeared beside me. She had come straight from her hospital shift, still in her scrubs, her eyes red from either crying or a complete lack of sleep. Probably both. "Did you hear what people are saying?" she asked, her voice low and urgent. "About Mr. Vasquez. No one can find him. And apparently he doesn't even own the building anymore. He sold it 3 months ago. Some company called Northstar Development. People are saying they've been buying up old buildings all over Brooklyn." As we talked, more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Someone had created a group chat to share information, and rumors were flying. Walter, who had been released from the hospital, joined us with some actual concrete news. "That's illegal," I protested. "They can't just burn down a building with people still inside." "Of course it's illegal," Walter agreed, a grim look on his face. "But it's also incredibly hard to prove. And they're careful. They make sure the fires start in unoccupied areas, usually at night when most people would be awake and could smell the smoke. They're not trying to kill anyone, just destroy the building." As if on cue, a young man approached our table. He was tall, with curly hair and glasses, and he was carrying a messenger bag emblazoned with the logo of a local news website. But Derek seemed genuinely concerned, and Walter wisely thought that having media attention might actually protect us. One by one we shared our experiences, our observations, and our growing suspicions. "This isn't the first time I've heard stories about Northstar," Derek admitted after listening intently to all of us. Northstar was owned by a larger corporation which was in turn owned by a massive investment group. While we were talking, my phone rang. It was Sophia from the gallery. "Oh, thank goodness. Listen, I know this is terrible timing, but I wanted to let you know the exhibition is still on. In fact, several collectors have already expressed serious interest after seeing your work during the setup. It felt wrong to even be thinking about my career at a moment like this, but it was also the one bright spot in an otherwise devastating and overwhelming day. As I ended the call, I looked up to see my father walking into the coffee shop. He spotted me immediately and headed over, his face a mixture of profound relief and deep concern. He had driven through the night all the way from Ohio to get to me. "Audrey," he said, pulling me into a tight, grounding hug. "I had to see for myself that you were okay." For a moment I was simply his daughter again. So grateful for his solid, reassuring presence. "I've already called about some temporary housing options, and I brought you some clothes and basics." He glanced around at my displaced neighbors. "Have you all started filing your insurance claims?" "Dad," I said quietly, "I told you I don't have insurance." His expression tightened, but he just nodded. "Right. Well, we'll figure it out. The important thing is that you're safe." Someone started a spreadsheet of resources and contact information. Derek promised to investigate Northstar further, and to put us in touch with tenants from their other buildings who had experienced similar, suspicious incidents. By evening we had our first direct contact with Northstar. A representative named Eliza Burke arrived at the coffee shop, dressed impeccably in a pantsuit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. "We are working closely with the authorities to determine the cause of the fire." She smiled thinly. "I'm not authorized to discuss specific business transactions, but I can assure you that Northstar is committed to the safety and well-being of all our residents." "Then why didn't you inform us of the change in ownership?" I asked, my voice rising. "And why were there inspectors in the building yesterday without any proper notice?" Her smile never wavered. "I'm not aware of any inspections that took place yesterday. Perhaps they were from the city." No one believed her, but we had no proof of anything yet. This was so much bigger than just my lost apartment. This was about a systematic, predatory exploitation of vulnerable tenants, and it was happening all over the city. I wouldn't just move on and try to rebuild my life somewhere else. I would find out what really happened, and I would hold Northstar accountable not just for myself, but for all of my neighbors who had lost everything. "The key is to find concrete connections between their different properties," he explained. I spent my day contacting the other tenants, meticulously creating a detailed timeline of all the strange occurrences in the building leading up to the fire. Walter remembered overhearing a heated argument between Mr. Vasquez and a man in an expensive suit about 2 weeks prior. My father, meanwhile, was growing increasingly frustrated with my focus on the investigation rather than on my own practical needs. "Dad, the police aren't treating this as a priority," I argued. "To them, it's just another building fire until it's proven otherwise. Meanwhile, these developers are getting away with destroying people's lives." His expression was pained. "I understand that you're angry, but you're not a detective or a lawyer. You're an artist with a major exhibition opening in just 10 days. You need to focus on that." "I can do both," I insisted, though a part of me wasn't entirely convinced. The financial reality of my situation was beginning to set in hard. Without renter's insurance, I had lost roughly $30,000 worth of possessions. Some moved in with family or friends outside the city. Our group chat became less active as people understandably focused on rebuilding their own individual lives. On the 3rd day after the fire, Northstar made their move. "It's a trap," Derek warned when I showed him the email. "If you sign that, you can't pursue any legal action against them later, even if we find definitive proof that they were responsible." But $3,000 was a tempting offer for many of my neighbors who had been left with nothing. By the end of the week, I learned that nearly half of them had accepted the offer, including the Patel family, who desperately needed the money to keep their small grocery store from going under. My father became increasingly insistent that I come back to Ohio with him. Going back now felt like admitting a crushing defeat. My new paintings, born from the turmoil of the recent events, had a raw, visceral energy that even I could recognize as being powerful. She agreed to meet with the remaining residents who hadn't taken the settlement. "Building a case against them will be challenging," she warned us in her small, file-crowded office. Following the trail of money and responsibility becomes nearly impossible. While I was young enough to couchsurf and determined enough to seek justice, many of my neighbors were facing much harsher, more immediate realities. The pressure intensified when I received a voicemail from an unknown number. Miss Wilson, this is a courtesy call to remind you that the pursuit of baseless claims can constitute defamation. Northstar values its reputation and will defend it vigorously. The voice was professional, female, and carried an unmistakable, chilling threat. I played it for Derek, who looked genuinely concerned. "They're worried," he said. "Which means we might be onto something. But you need to be careful, Audrey. These people have deep pockets and powerful connections." My dad noticed my distraction during dinner that night. "What's wrong? And don't you dare say nothing." "Dad, I can't. The exhibition opens in a week, and I need to see this through." "See what through? Getting yourself hurt or worse? For what?" "For an apartment you didn't even own." "For justice." I snapped back. "For people who can't fight for themselves. Mr. Vasquez is still missing, did you know that? What if something happened to him too?" It wasn't meant as a compliment. Sophia began to express concern that the growing controversy might affect attendance at the opening. "Some of our regular collectors have connections to real estate interests," she explained gently. "I support what you're doing, Audrey, but perhaps we could try to keep it separate from the exhibition." Dark circles formed under my eyes, and I lost weight that I couldn't afford to lose. Was my father right? Was I just throwing good energy after bad, fighting a battle I could never win? The night of my exhibition opening arrived with a strange, conflicting mix of excitement and dread. Sophia had even arranged for a photographer from a prominent art blog to attend. "Just try to focus on tonight, just for a few hours." He had extended his hotel stay, unwilling to leave me alone after that threatening voicemail. Critics praised the raw emotional landscapes and the unflinching exploration of displacement and loss. 3 of my paintings sold within the first hour, including my largest piece, which went for a sum that would cover several months of rent in a new apartment. Instead, I kept glancing at the door, half expecting representatives from Northstar to appear at any moment. Derek had promised to stop by later with any updates on his investigation. Around 9 p.m., when the gallery was packed, I noticed 3 men in expensive suits enter. "You want me to create art for the company that burned down my home?" "To appreciate art," he replied smoothly, "and perhaps to discuss how Northstar might be able to support your career. We're always looking to invest in local talent." "She doesn't need your kind of help," my dad replied. Mercer shrugged. "As you wish. But remember, Miss Wilson, that reputations in the art world are fragile. Collectors don't appreciate controversy." As they left, I realized the entire confrontation had been captured by several phone cameras. My name was now publicly and irrevocably linked with the allegations. The next day brought both opportunity and threat. Nothing valuable had been taken, but the message was crystal clear. "We know where you live." For once I was tempted to agree. The intrusion felt violating in a way that even the fire hadn't. But then Derek called with incredible news. "And get this," he continued. "They applied for construction permits for a new luxury building at the same address 1 week before the fire. How could they possibly know the building would need to be condemned unless they had planned it all along?" His discovery renewed my determination, but the break-in had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. That night my dad and I had our biggest fight yet. "Some things are worth fighting for, Dad. You taught me that." He stopped pacing and stared at me. "I taught you to be practical, to build security, not to go tilting at windmills. Because it was the right thing to do. I wasn't risking my physical safety." For the first time since the fire, I was truly alone with my thoughts. Around 3 a.m., exhausted but unable to sleep, I wondered if my father was right. Every painting that had sold represented not just income, but a connection. The realization hit me like a thunderbolt. My art wasn't just a career path. It was a platform, a voice, a weapon. Something about housing injustice and community displacement, using materials salvaged from the building. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before she answered. "That's not what galleries typically do, Audrey." "I know, but it could be powerful and timely." The money from my sold paintings provided immediate, desperately needed breathing room. I could afford a slightly better apartment, art supplies, and basic necessities. Instead of just fighting North Star legally, we would fight them in the court of public opinion. Derek's articles had already generated significant interest, but an art installation could reach an entirely different audience. Over the next few days, we gathered at what remained of our building, collecting charred pieces of the structure. Each piece held a story, a fragment of our community's life. He also managed to locate a former North Star employee who was willing to speak anonymously about the company's practices. As word of our project spread, housing advocates and tenant organizations reached out to join forces. Cautious after the break-in, I checked the peephole. My father stood in the hallway, holding a suitcase. He set down his suitcase. Because you were right. About standing up for what's right, and about me being the one who taught you that. I don't fully understand what you're doing with all this, but I want to help if you'll let me. It was the last thing I had ever expected. My pragmatic, spreadsheet-loving father wanted to join my artistic protest against corporate greed. I also brought something that might help, he added, pulling out his laptop. I've been looking into North Star's financial statements. Public companies always leave a paper trail, and accounting has always been my specialty. For the first time since the fire, I felt a surge of genuine, powerful hope. With my father's analytical skills and my artistic vision, we might actually stand a chance against a giant like North Star. That night, Dad slept on my couch, his presence somehow making the small, vulnerable space feel safe again. My father and I were finally seeing each other clearly, as adults with different strengths but shared, unbreakable values. The next morning brought another surprise. When I told my father, he nodded thoughtfully. That's good. But we still need to follow the money. Corporations like North Star don't make decisions without calculating the financial benefit down to the last penny. With my father's help, our strategy evolved and sharpened. His deep business knowledge proved invaluable as we planned our multi-front approach. The art installation began to take shape in a donated warehouse space. I created a scaled replica of our building using charred wood and melted objects salvaged from the fire. Walter's jazz record collection, mostly warped and unplayable, but still recognizable. A child's drawing singed at the edges, recovered from the Patel's apartment. Derek's articles about the project generated significant media interest, and the housing advocacy groups helped spread the word far and wide. She had copied emails discussing preparation work and site clearing at our building just days before the fire. But everyone knew what was expected. Clear the buildings quickly, whatever it takes. With this new information, Josephine felt we finally had enough to approach the district attorney's office. My father, who had initially been skeptical of our legal chances, now threw himself fully into building the case. He arrived one morning with unexpected news. Can they help us? I asked. They're starting to put pressure on them from the inside. Investors hate negative publicity. It affects stock prices. Our coalition continued to grow. Tenants from other North Star properties came forward with their own eerily similar stories. Community organizations offered support and resources. Despite the weather, the warehouse was packed. News crews filmed as visitors moved silently through the recreated building, reading the handwritten stories, touching the charred objects, and experiencing a fraction of what we had lost. I stood near the entrance watching people's reactions. My father stood beside me, still a bit uncomfortable in the artistic setting, but prouder than I had ever seen him. Your mother would have loved this, he said quietly. She always said your stubbornness would either be your downfall or your greatest strength. The exhibition received coverage not just from local media, but from national news outlets. A prominent news magazine ran a feature story on the artist fighting big development. Suddenly, North Star found itself in an uncomfortable, unwelcome spotlight. First came the legal threats. Cease and desist letters demanding we remove specific allegations. When those failed to intimidate us, they launched a massive PR campaign, portraying themselves as community partners who were being unfairly targeted. The pressure intensified. Someone broke into the warehouse one night, vandalizing parts of the installation. Anonymous online accounts began attacking my artistic credentials and my personal character. So do we, my father responded, his voice firm. And we have something they don't, the truth. Time was something many of our coalition members didn't have. Walter had been forced to move in with his nephew in New Jersey. The Patels were struggling to keep their store open without the regular customers from our building. Others had been forced to leave the city entirely. We needed a more immediate victory. That's when my father had his breakthrough. There's a pattern. The same city inspectors are signing off on all their buildings, even when there were obvious documented code violations. He showed me a spreadsheet tracking a series of large payments from a North Star subsidiary to a small consulting company owned by the brother-in-law of the city's deputy building commissioner. Derek began digging into the connections between North Star executives and city officials. Josephine started preparing the documentation for a much broader corruption case. $100,000, she said, sliding a document across my tiny coffee table. Plus guaranteed housing in any North Star property of your choice. All we ask is that you end this campaign and sign a non-disclosure agreement. The amount was staggering. It would secure my future, fund my art career, and solve all of my immediate problems. For a brief moment I was tempted. And what about the other tenants? What about the next building North Star decides to accelerate? You mean you want to buy her silence while you continue business as usual? Dad said, his voice cold. After she left, my father looked at me with a newfound respect in his eyes. That was a lot of money to walk away from. Some things are worth more than money, I replied, echoing a lesson he had taught me long ago, though neither of us had realized at the time that I was listening. 2 inspectors were immediately suspended, pending a full review of their cases. It wasn't a conviction, but it was a start. More importantly, it validated everything we had been saying all along. We weren't just disgruntled tenants or conspiracy theorists. We were citizens demanding accountability. The night of the announcement, my father and I celebrated with takeout Chinese food in my sublet. As we ate from the white paper cartons, sitting on my second-hand furniture, I realized just how much had changed between us. I'm proud of you, Audrey, he said, reaching for the last egg roll. Your mother always said you had a fire in you. I used to worry about that. Now I see that it's your greatest strength. I couldn't have done this without you, I admitted honestly. Your spreadsheets and your financial detective work made all the difference. Whatever happened with North Star, my father and I had found our way back to each other through this fight. Some buildings may have burned, but other more important foundations had been strengthened. 1 year after the fire, I stood in a packed courtroom as the verdict was announced. The company itself was ordered to pay substantial damages to all of the former tenants. My father sat beside me, his hand reaching for mine as the judge read the final decision. His temporary leave of absence had turned into an early retirement as he dedicated himself fully to our cause. Together we had navigated the complex legal system, gathered evidence, and supported our scattered community of displaced neighbors. Today's verdict sends a clear and powerful message that no corporation is above the law, she declared. Housing is a human right, not just a commodity to be exploited for profit. That evening, we held a celebration at the community center that had grown out of our advocacy work. The settlement money had been used not only to compensate the individual tenants, but also to establish a permanent housing justice organization. It would also fund a brand new, truly affordable housing development, built right on the site of our former building. Walter had moved back from New Jersey to serve on the board of the new organization. As people mingled, sharing food and stories, I found a quiet moment with my father near the windows, overlooking the construction site where our old home once stood. He shook his head. I've always wondered about that. My father nodded thoughtfully. I had a similar revelation. All those years I spent pushing you towards security and stability, I thought I was protecting you. But sometimes the greatest security comes from standing up for what you know is right, even when it's risky. The organization we founded had become a powerful force for good in the city, using a combination of legal action, public art, and my father's brilliant financial maneuvering to fight predatory developers. The fire had destroyed my home, but it had illuminated truths I might never have discovered otherwise. It taught me about community and resilience, about speaking truth to power, and about finding common ground with those you least expect to understand you. And if this journey of fighting back against injustice and finding unexpected allies resonated with you, please hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the things that break us are the very things that help us find our true purpose.